tonight as we get going into this. And remember, a lot of this is talking about things being set up. And what I mean by that is we've talked a lot about the law. We talked a lot about grace. Last week we really hit home the difference between the flesh and the spirit, and how they're constantly going back and forth with each other. And that even though as we are saved, for those who are Christians, we're saved from that, but the issue that really comes to play is like we still keep sinning. We still keep messing up. And so there's still this internal battle that rages on in us. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight as we go into chapter 8. So let's read this together. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit, because the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set you free from the law and of sin and death." And this is where we're going to spend a lot of time tonight. It says, "What the law could not do, since it was weakened by the flesh, God did. He condemned sin in the flesh by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh as a sin offering." It's interesting when we look at this. Let me just recap. The law is not bad. There's nothing wrong with the law. The law is put there to help guide us, to show us what to do, to help walk us through the life. But plain and simple, the law couldn't save us. So why couldn't the law save us? Why was it not enough?
Because we couldn't keep it perfectly.
And now, was that the law's fault?
No, that was definitely ours.
That's why I like Ray. No, that's on us. Yeah. It's on us. It's weakened, and to use the term that Paul is using here, it's weakened by the flesh, right? The law couldn't save us because it was weakened by the flesh. Nothing wrong with the law, but the problems is more lying within the operators of the law, the people who are handling it. But what's interesting, though, here is how we look at the law, right? And what I mean by this is there's different ways to approach the law and how you engage the law. I love what it says here. What the law could not do, since it was weakened by the flesh, God did. He condemned the sin in the flesh by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh as a sin offering. But this idea of being weakened by the flesh, the law is, it says here, the law is weakened by the flesh. Okay? Think about it this way. It's all in your approach of how you're going to engage the law, how you're going to engage what you're doing. If you engage in activity based off of, look what I'm going to do, look what I did, versus engaging the law from a spiritual perspective, okay? See if I can clear this up, because it really is a deep issue here. But, for instance, the Pharisees, let's take them as an example. Did Jesus think that the Pharisees are righteous? Yes or no?
They had a form of righteousness.
Yeah, but yes, you have a yes and a no, and you're both right. But why weren't they righteous?
They didn't practice what they preached. They were outwardly righteous, but inwardly sinful.
They had an inward problem, but an outward. They were good outside, but not so good inside. Okay, that's true. So when I talk about this idea of how we engage the law, you can engage the law as something, look what I did, versus something engaging the law saying, look, I'm trying to engage Christ. I'm trying to come to Christ. One, and I was battling back and forth this word, this is the difference between a life built on faith, and because of that faith, I'm going to try to follow the law, follow the do's and the don'ts. One of the things I always tell people, especially if they're young in their faith or they've walked away from their faith or they misunderstand what Christianity is all about, is I say Christianity is not about the do's and the don'ts. It's a relationship. And I always say it this way, and I think I said it Sunday night too, but the relationship aspect, right? That is what's going to drive you to do the things you're supposed to do or not do the things you're not supposed to do. So that it's almost like that relationship, that your desire to follow God is what's going to do that. But yet this says that the law was weakened by the flesh. And I think the fact that it was weakened means there's a little more to it, in the sense that sometimes if you approach the law with, look what I'm doing, look what I'm going there. We hear James say we're not saved by works, we're saved by what? Faith. Now, but faith without works is dead. I mean, so it's like you still got to have the works, but you got to have the faith. But the question comes is, what is driving the works? What is making that? I love John 15, and we're actually going to talk about a lot this Sunday morning too, is about how God requires production. And to give you a little away, we're talking about the fig tree. Jesus gets the fig tree, and it looks like a fig tree, it acts like a fig tree, but it isn't making any figs. And so his point is like, what's the point if you're not doing what you were created to? And so when you're in this relationship with God, it's not about, look what I did, look how I came up with this. But what I've seen in people, when people get to the point to where they take a legalistic approach, I did this, and this. And look how I did it. I crossed all my T's. I dotted all my I's. What happens on a spiritual level is when their joy comes from fulfilling the task they do, and they're not being fed by God, eventually they start to fall away from God. Think about it this way: have you ever known somebody who's backslidden? Yeah,
What?
backslidden.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, somebody backslides, right? And then you've probably gotten into this debate with someone. Well, I wonder if they ever were a believer or not. Why do we have those conversations?
What kind of fruit are you producing?
Right. But they go from producing fruit to not producing fruit. Right? So if they produce fruit, when they stop producing fruit, and then we still start to ask, I wonder if they ever believed or not, what does that mean?
I think then you question the motives of why they were producing fruit
Go
in
on.
the first place.
Why did they quit?
Yeah, keep going. Keep going. You're on a roll. Keep going. So,
Well, as you said, it's because of the relationship. Was the relationship really there? And that's the reason they were doing the good works and fruits? Or was
right.
it for some selfish reason, personal reason, political reason, social reason, whatever it could be?
Yeah.
Somebody hurt your feelings.
Yeah. I quote that passage. Jesus says, many will come in my name saying, Lord, Lord. And it's not just, but I usually pause and I go on, and he says, depart from me, I never knew you. I don't finish the whole passage when I quote it a lot of times. The rest of it is like, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we do miracles in your name? Didn't we do this? Didn't we do that? I mean, what are they? They're basically laying out their resume, right? They're laying out, look what I did. But if their heart wasn't in it, and they hadn't surrendered, and they never experienced God, that's what we talked about lunch day. If you don't have that moment in life where you encounter God and your life is different, you can, I've seen some people, well, let's give Christianity a try. Well, let's give this a try. And their idea of giving it a try is, let me do all the good things I'm supposed to do. Let me do all the things that I'm supposed to be. And what's missing is that personal, intimate relationship with God that we're supposed to have. And I think what you get to the point here is like, you can go to the law, but if you're going to the law through legalism, it's not going to be enough. It's never going to be enough. I'm not saying that I'm going to talk about a church here that I knew growing up. This church is a great church, good church. A lot of people would say they're legalistic. Well, I'm going to say they were very focused, because I did see a whole lot of people come to Christ, but they also said, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. Some people would take what they would say and say, no, they're legalistic and judgmental. Others people like, no, we just want to remove all the barriers, all the distractions, and say, let's just focus on God. And so you could look at it both ways, but what happens, though, is if you don't clearly explain the relationship side and the need for that relationship side, then all of a sudden Christianity starts to sound more and more and more like a book of rules. What's sad is I can almost guarantee you probably could rattle off 5, 10 or more people who you know who have sort of walked away from their faith, walked away from the church, walked away from how they grew up, because in their mind, well, church is this, or church is that. In reality, it's not. I mean, that's what we talked about last Sunday. It's not about you. It's not about what church did for you. It's about what you come and you give back to God. And they've walked away from it because they didn't have that relationship with God. They gave it all they had, but what does it says? The law couldn't do it. So, and this is what Paul is saying. What the law couldn't do, in essence, what we couldn't do, what does it say did? God did. We couldn't save ourselves. The law couldn't save us. So none of us can get, there is no one righteous, no, not one, is what Scripture says, all right? So this says that God did it. God is the one who finishes the road. And here's the interesting thing. And this is the way you got to look at this. God paved the road. We couldn't do it. He made the road, paved the road. He marked the road. He said, this is how you get to God. This is what Jesus did. Jesus paved the road. This is how you get to an intimate relationship with Him. Now, here's the crazy thing. You still have to come to that fork in the road and decide, do I go that way to God and follow that path? Or do I do what I want to do? And what's Scripture say about those two roads? There's like an 8-lane interstate going this way. There's like a little narrow path going that way. You know, and that's because it looks like, oh, that's wide open. But in reality, it's like, the path towards God, it's laid out, it's there, and it's ready. But people got to understand, why would I want to go that route? Because that road leads to destruction. This road doesn't. And that's hard for us to understand. Interesting thing I wrote here, and I hope this makes sense. It all comes back to that choice. You get to that fork in the road, you're going to try to fix the problems you have in your life, right? And so you have a choice whether you're going to choose God or you're going to choose yourself. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let's say you're on the legalistic mindset here, right? And if you make a choice, and I wrote down here, you can either go to God or self. If you go to self, that's going to eventually lead to a sin, and that sin's going to lead to what this says, death. Okay? Does that make sense? Here's the other thing. But if you go with God, you're going to go, and you can choose God. You might, many times, hopefully you'll do the right thing. But sometimes, we still what? We still sin. But notice the difference. When you make that choice, when you sin and you've given your life to God, because you're not going to be perfect, you're still, the way that God sees you is you're still covered. That's why I use the fancy different colors right there. Not that sin is covered by grace so that you can lean on God more and continue in your life. This sin, done. It leads to death. And I think what we have to understand, it really does come back to our choices of whether or not we're going to obey God or we're not going to obey God. That's to choose God, or you can call it a choice, you can call it following, you can call it all kinds of different things. Are you going to be intimate in that relationship? You're going to fully surrender? There's about 1,000 different words you can use here and interchange. But the point is, are you going to go the path of God or not? Is there sin when you go down the path of God and choose God? Does that mean you immediately stop sinning? No, you got to have that process of sanctification, that process of being molded into what you're supposed to do. But He's condemned.
Deeper and deeper you get to know God, is when you actually can tell that you're doing, sins. Because when you don't really know Him, then you don't really know that you're even sinning.
Yeah.
And
You're like,
once you get closer to God, then you're like, Well, there's a reason why I feel kind of guilty right now.
Maybe I'm not supposed to do that. You know?
To do that.
Yeah, and it's now what we got to be careful is, and this is where legalism comes into play, is when we see somebody who comes to know Christ and then they go off and we haven't. How do I say this? I know how to say this. This is the difference between making. We're supposed to make, right? It's our job, and I cannot spell. Look at that. Making. You gotta want, and many times this is where we Christians royally mess it up. Let me go save some people, right? I mean, how many times have you heard people say that? We gotta go spread the word and save some people, and then you lead them to Christ, which really always that makes me laugh. Leading someone to Christ, you introduce them to Christ. Christ is the one God is the one who does the saving, not us. We just introduce them to God. God softens their heart. God prepares them. And then you get to that point, wow, their eyes are open and they get it. But we're making converts. Is that what we're supposed to go make? Go make converts. Is that what Jesus said? What did he say do?
Disciples.
Whoa, that's different. Discipling means what? You have to... You get your hands dirty, or do you just like, oh, you're a convert, good job, we'll see you in heaven. You know, you made the cut, here's your ticket. Now, I mean, you know, you walk them through that process. You know, and what we see here is that the road's open, but God made the road so that we can make disciples. You know? And what the problem that we get into is that, with what you're saying is, when you start making disciples, doesn't mean they're ready. I mean, just look at Jesus' disciples, year 1 to year 3. I mean, and that's God himself mentoring them, right? Think about that. God himself is mentoring these 12 men, and one of them didn't even pass. So, I mean, think about that. That's how messed up humans are, right? So, you got 11 disciples who sort of get it, and then God empowers them through it. But even then, I mean, so many times it's like, I love when Jesus goes, how many times do I have to explain this to you? And he says that over and over. It's like, and then they get to the point like, you know, oh, this had to be an awkward situation when James and John's mom comes up and says, hey, why don't you skip my boys up there? And she's like, really? And it's like, and you got all the other disciples like, well, are you kidding me? She just did what? So, you know, they're still messing up along the route, right? Which means we're still going to mess up along the way. But it's a process of going there. And the difference, though, is you don't just give up on it. And that's how, what you're saying right there, part of that sanctification process is when I'm here in my faith, I might not know that's a sin. Well, how do I not know that's a sin? Well, has anybody told you that that's a sin? I mean, whose job is it to tell them that we're not supposed to do that? You know, I heard a friend of mine was talking about someone was saved and they got baptized and they said if I remember the story correct, they started praying to God. You know, and they started saying, well, how do you pray to God? You just talk to God, just talk like you're talking, right? It's like, okay, and so he didn't grow up in church or anything. Dear God. Bleep, did he bleep, bleep. And you're just like, whoa. It was like, that's how I talk. Let's talk about how you talk. And so they had to have that conversation because in his mind, he didn't know that was wrong. I had to do that with somebody. He's like, we're sitting in the car and he's like, well, then I just told him, and I was like, oh, well, okay, maybe you shouldn't say that. You know, so I mean, there's all those times, but that's the part of making. That's the part we do. Because here's the thing, it's a process to do it, and we have to do it and God does it. God made the way. If we just made a convert, that's not enough. They got to walk them through that. But it says that He condemned sin in the flesh by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh as a sin offering. But it goes on, it says, in order that the law's requirement will be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but walk according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit have their minds set on things of the Spirit. That's huge. Sin starts here. And everybody says, it starts in your heart. No, it starts up here, man. Now you can say, well, that's your spirit. That's what this is saying. But it starts in you. Sin, that's what Jesus was trying to say at the Sermon on the Mount, the intimacy there. It starts in here. If you are waiting for the sin to be acted out, it's too late. And that's why I was saying, for what the law couldn't do, because it was weakened by the flesh, God did. Because for those who live according to the flesh, they're going to think like the flesh. For those who live according to the Spirit, their mind is set on things of the Spirit. That's the thing that hit me so hard the other day when it was talking about, I told you what Paul Free said. Hi, Mika, that's my sister calling me in the middle of Bible study. So, but that's the thing that Paul was saying, that before he knew Christ, a friend comes up to him. I think I told you this story. He said that he wasn't a Christian yet, and one of his friends had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. They said, I think we need to go get an abortion. He wasn't a Christian. He said, yeah, let's do it. And he was like, now he says, as a Christian, oh my goodness, no, don't. Don't do that. But when his mind was things on the flesh, guess what? You're going to think like the flesh. But when your mind is things of the Spirit, you're going to think differently. This is why verses like these is why I say this. When you truly, not just say I'm going to give my best for God, or I'm going to make a deal with God. If those war stories, God, if you give me out of this jam, I'm going to live for you for the rest of my life. Nah, maybe. Maybe you mean that, maybe you don't. But when you truly encounter God, you're changed. That's not to say you won't make a mistake, but you're changed. Because now you're not thinking about things of the flesh, you're thinking about things of the Spirit. And understand, when that changes in your life, when I say the Spirit, that means everything about inside of you goes away, and you erase all that, and God comes in and He lives there. And that's this mindset that we're supposed to have as we go through this. Look what it goes on. It says here, now the mindset of the flesh is death, but the mindset of the Spirit is life and peace. Man, this is huge. I hope you see this. This idea, when you see people who don't know Christ, don't they just always seem like down? I'm not saying Christians don't get down. I'm not saying Christians don't get depressed. That happens. But what allows us to get back up is our relationship with God. But you see other people, it's like, where is their hope? Where does that come from? With Christ, hope springs eternal. But in this world, hope is until the next defeat. I always thought the Chicago Bulls were going to be the best basketball team in forever. And then Michael Jordan up and retired, and that they've stunk ever since, So, but if my hope is built on something as flimsy as that, I'm ruined. But with Christ in us, my hope is not in things of this world, but it's things above and beyond that. But this is the thing that gets me. It's a life that is on a life of peace. Having life, having peace. Outside of Christ, where does our joy come from? Where does our life come from? How many times you do something, it's like, well, that was nice. Now what? They say, and I'm not an Alabama fan, but all these championships that Nick Saban's winning, it was like he celebrates it for like 3 hours, and the next day he's talking like, okay, what are we doing next? He's already getting ready for next year. I was like, as a Christian, it's like we don't have to have life. You work all that just for like 3 hours. You know what I mean? Versus as a Christian, it's like you can work and work and work, knowing that you're not working to gain things. You're just working because you want to show your adoration and love to God. And yet your peace and your joy comes from like, I just get to have time with God. I'll end on this tonight because I think this is a good place to end. But it's sort of like this: the Spirit's what gives us life. The Spirit's what we're working to, and the Spirit's what turns this mortal body into something worth living for. Okay, but I'm gonna say it this way: if you're looking for that joy, if you're looking for something that makes it worthwhile, that joy of the things of this world, they're going to come and they're going to go, and you're going to be on this huge roller coaster, left and right, left and right. If you want to have I'd like to have a little bit of stability in my life. One of the best things you can do is just be still and know God, and allow God to come around you. And that's what I said Sunday when we were doing our prayer, our study on prayer. It's like one of the best prayers you can do is to shut this and just allow God, recognize His presence, have Him come around you, and just say, God, just make yourself real to me. Make yourself known to me. Make your presence so magnificent that I can't miss you right now. And there's going to be crazy times that happens. I'll tell you one was for me this past Sunday, and I talked about it in I think I did both services this way, but the idea of driving to church, feeling like, the sun was supposed to be rising in the east, and I looked over there, well, that's not east. Yeah, that way, wherever it was, the east, yeah. I did that Sunday too. It was supposed to rise in the east, but when you looked over there, it's over here. It's like it's not totally east. It's like, well, how does that work? And it's like, well, that's because the planet sort of tilted. Well, it's like, well, that's crazy. But then it rises, meaning it spins, and there's someone designed it, so not only does it spin, but it spins and goes around the sun. And there's enough pull that the planets don't bounce into each other and explode and all this. And I'm thinking, my crazy ADD brain got to the point that said, wow, God did all of that. And then you just get in awe of who God is, and then you're thinking, my little issues, God's got it. If God can do that, God can take care of this. And I think that's something we have to understand. That's where our life comes from. That's where our peace comes from, when we fully submit over to the one who did all of that. And that's the amazing thing that I see with God. So just things to be thinking on, things to be going on. Any questions or comments? I really am liking this. But yes.
I was thinking too, when you had the fork in the road there between the Pharisees and the believers. It's really those Pharisees, they might not have their mind on sin but on righteousness.
Exactly.
But they're not depending on the grace of God to do it. They're dependent on themselves. And they're failing. That's
a great point. Notice when they make that choice, it's not like they're making a choice to do something bad. But by focused on doing something good, even if you're doing something good with the wrong purpose and the wrong desire and the wrong focus, if it's all about you, it's going to lead to something else. That's what I think. I honestly begin to wonder. I talked Sunday about the concept of the thing that scares us the most is how we worship ourselves versus worshiping God. Makes you wonder if even biblical times that was still the case. They wanted to feel good, or they wanted to have that comfort. We've just redefined what it means to worship ourselves in today's world. I know we don't want to submit. That's an understatement. But yeah, it's a good point. It's not like you got to be thinking like I'm horribly to go down that road. You might be saying, well, I'm going to do something good, but what am I going to get out of it? It's like I knew a guy who wanted to be a doctor. It's like, well, that's great. Why do you want to be a doctor? Because I want to make a lot of money. And that was his mindset, versus like, I want to be a doctor. Why do you want to be a doctor? Because God wants me to go help people. I'm like, that's a little, you see there's nothing wrong with being a doctor. God, we need good doctors. We need good Christian. We need good Christian everything. But the point is like, what's the purpose? What's the mindset you got going into it, and how we do it? That's an amazing point right there. Just because you do something good doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it the right way. So
that's why I got a lot of people say they want money, and they want to do this and want to do that. I said, I'm just happy exactly the way I am. If I could pay my bills without worrying about paying my bills,
yeah,
and still have a little bit left over to go out every so often and get something to eat or whatever,
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah, well, I've learned this.
You get more. The more money you get, is the more money you're gonna want.
The more money you get, the more money you spend. And then you're usually still back where you're at.
I think you hit on one of the really big points there. If you have a thankful heart,
Mm-hmm.
you can work past all that.
Yeah.
But what generally happens in our humanistic way in ourself, we get selfish.
Yeah.
But if we're thankful for, like I said, whatever you got, and if we're thankful for our situation, even when times are good and times are bad, we're still thankful for what God's done for us.
Yeah.
You can work past that, but I don't think the Pharisees were thankful. I think they were greedy.
Mm.
There's a difference.
Yeah. And I think, not all of them. I mean, you see Nicodemus who approaches Jesus,
Sure.
And you see a lot of them had a hard time condemning Jesus. And think about this. I mean, Paul wasn't so much in it for himself. He just had the zeal to fulfill Scripture. I mean, you talk about legalism. I mean, he just had that zeal, but he was putting that zeal in the wrong place. That's why it's not about the actions. It's about the who you know and who you serve. And at that point, he was serving the wrong thing. And he came, and Jesus said, "Whoa, whoa," and made him realize that. And I think that comes to turn. I think we all come to that place in our lives. Eventually, no matter who we are, I think God, whether we've been a believer, however we grew up, I think eventually God puts it out in front of you and says, "Hey, I'm here. If you want this, you need to start going this way, or you can go this way." And I think at that time people make some choices like, "Well, you haven't done anything for me," and because we're not thankful for what God has done. So, but I also say this, and we can end on this. That's why we also can't lose sight of how good we have it. There's some people, not their fault, who are raised and brought up in situations where, they're sold into slavery, or they're sold into the sex industry, or they're sold all this other stuff. Unbeknownst to them, they did nothing wrong, but they're put in those situations. And so we also got to think about, yes, we are so blessed to be able to serve and have and be able to meet and do this. We can't take that for granted. But we need to use those freedoms to do something with it. And I think that's where the church needs to step up a little more. So
I think that's how I keep myself humble. Like, when I get aggravated about I don't have money for this or that or the other, and I'm like, what I do have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not very many people have what what I do, what I have, or you know what I mean. So and there's people out there that can't eat. Can't see, can't hear, or whatever.
Yeah, I'll say this, and we'll wrap up on this. I'm a huge proponent of mission trips. And when I say mission trips, I'm not just talking about I think everybody as a Christian should go on a foreign mission trip, get out of the country, do something like that at one point in their life. The earlier, the better. Okay? And the reason I always say that is because I'll give you a good example. I used to take teenagers to Puerto Rico, and we get off that plane, we get in a van, we drive to the west side of the island. And I remember there was a guy who went with us, a grown adult, his kid was with us, and he said, I've been to Puerto Rico 4 or 5 times. Yeah. He got off the plane, and he went to that resort, and he had a great vacation in Puerto Rico. And it never really got out of the resort area, never left a bad, it's always really nice right in there. It's like we drove the other side of the island, and I'm not saying Puerto Rico's a great place. Trust me, it's not third world. There's a whole lot worse places out there. But we got the other side of the island, and he was like, whoa. Like, this wasn't the Puerto Rico. I remember I had just gotten back we went to Cuba 3 times, and I had just gotten back, and they just opened it up. All that was happening. And I remember the Kardashians were having a special, and they had gone down and they were in Havana, and it's like, look how amazing Cuba is. Like, oh my goodness. No. It's like, go another 100 yards past where you went, and you're going to see something completely different. And I think as a believer, once you get out of the bubble that we live in, and you see with your own eyes how, things can be, you come back home and you are forever changed. I mean, forever changed. That's the thing. That's why I think it's so important for us. It opens up our eyes. Yes.
I had the privilege of going to Cuba. You could go and witness. We were forbidden.
Oh, we were forbidden too.
I got to see all of Cuba.
Yeah.
With guards with us, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, we couldn't talk. We couldn't have service.
Somebody stayed right with us everywhere we went.
We had to do everything undercover. Even though we were allowed in, we still had to do everything undercover. And
Don't they know that that's what you're there for?
yeah.
Well, we were there supposedly on a different reason. We were told before we ever got there, you cannot. We couldn't even carry a Bible, a pen, or nothing.
Oh.